The concept of honorable death has permeated many cultures throughout human history, but few people embraced it as intensely and uniquely as the Viking. This notion, deeply rooted in ancient Norse society, shaped not only the way warriors approached battle, but also how an entire civilization viewed life, death, and what came after. Prepare yourself for a fascinating and sometimes disturbing journey through the beliefs and practices that defined what was considered an honorable death for the Viking. To truly understand the concept of honorable death in Viking culture, it is crucial to first understand the historical and mythological context in which this idea developed. The Vikings, a Norse people who inhabited Scandinavia between the 8th and 11th centuries, were known for their bravery in battle, seafaring skills, and a rich pantheon of gods and mythological creatures. Their worldview was deeply influenced by their mythology, in which fate, or Wyrd, played a central role. In Norse cosmology, the universe was divided into 9 worlds, interconnected by the cosmic tree Yggdrasil. At the top of this tree was Asgard, the realm of the gods, where Odin's hall, Valhalla, awaited the most valiant warriors who fell in battle. It was to this golden hall that the Vikings aspired to go after death, a place of eternal feasting, where the chosen would spend their days fighting and their nights feasting, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarok. Belief in Valhalla was a key driver behind the concept of an honorable death. For the Vikings, dying of old age or disease was considered shameful and undignified. Such deaths would condemn them to Helheim, a dark and desolate realm ruled by the goddess Hel. In contrast, death in battle, with sword in hand, was seen as the noblest passage to the afterlife. This worldview profoundly influenced the behavior of Viking warriors in combat. Historical accounts and Norse sagas are replete with stories of near-suicidal bravery, where warriors faced impossible odds with a smile on their faces, certain that their courage would earn them a place in Valhalla. A notable example is the story of the legendary berserker who single-handedly defended a narrow bridge against an entire army, allowing his comrades to escape. Even though he knew his death was certain, he fought with unparalleled ferocity, determined to make his passage to the afterlife as glorious as possible. However, it would be a mistake to think that honorable death for the Vikings was limited to the battlefield alone. Norse society valued other forms of sacrifice and courage equally. For example, explorers and navigators who ventured into unknown seas, facing storms and mythical creatures, were considered as worthy of Valhalla as warriors who fell in combat on land. A particularly intriguing and, by modern standards, shocking practice was the ritual known as the blood eagle. This method of execution, mentioned in several Norse sagas, involved cutting the victim's ribs at the spine and spreading them like wings, exposing the lung. Although the historicity of this ritual is debated by modern scholars, its mere existence in Norse narratives illustrates the complex relationship that the Vikings had with death and suffering. It is important to note that despite the emphasis on glorious death, the Vikings were not a suicidal people or desperate to die. On the contrary, they celebrated life with equal fervor. Elaborate feasts, competitions of skill and strength, and the pursuit of riches and fame were integral parts of Viking culture. An honorable death was seen not as an end in itself, but as the culmination of a well-lived life full of adventure and accomplishment. The pursuit of an honorable death also influenced Viking funeral practices. Funerals were elaborate affairs, especially for prominent warriors and leaders. One of the most famous rituals was the boat funeral, where the body of the deceased was placed on a ship along with his weapons, treasures, and sometimes even sacrificed animals and servants. The boat was then set on fire or buried, symbolizing the warrior's journey to the afterlife. One of the most vivid accounts of a Viking funeral comes from the Arab chronicler Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed the funeral of a Norse chieftain on the Volga River in the 10th century. His detailed description of the ritual, including the sacrifice of a slave girl who volunteered to accompany her master in death, offers a fascinating and disturbing glimpse into Viking beliefs and practices related to honorable death. The notion of an honorable death also extended beyond the individual, affecting entire families and clans. Revenge was a crucial aspect of Viking society, and failure to avenge the death of a relative was considered deeply dishonorable. This often led to cycles of violence that could last for generations, with each side seeking to restore honor through bloodshed. It is crucial, however, to avoid over-romanticizing these practices. The reality of Viking life was often brutal and violent, and many of the actions they considered honorable would be seen as barbaric by modern standards. Slavery was common, raids were frequent, and life was often short and hard. As Christianity began to spread across Scandinavia towards the end of the Viking Age, traditional notions of an honorable death began to change. The new religion brought with it different concepts of the afterlife, sin, and redemption, which gradually merged with and in some cases supplanted the old Norse belief. Yet echoes of the Viking concept of an honorable death persisted in Scandinavian culture and, in some ways, continue to resonate to this day. The ethic of hard work, the valorization of courage and loyalty, and a certain stoicism in the face of adversity can all be traced, at least in part, to these ancient Norse traditions. When we examine the concept of an honorable death among the Vikings, we are confronted with a worldview radically different from our own. A society where death was not something to be feared, but an opportunity to prove one's worth and secure a place in eternity. This perspective shaped not only how the Vikings faced death, but how they lived their lives. For the Viking warrior, every battle was a chance to demonstrate his courage and skill, not only to his fellow warriors, but to the gods themselves, who were believed to be watching from Asgard. Every scar was a badge of honor, every wound a testament to bravery. Death in combat was seen not as a tragedy, but as the pinnacle of a life well lived. This mindset had profound implications for the way the Vikings waged war. Tactics that might seem suicidal to other cultures were common among Norse warriors. Charges against superior enemy lines, single-handed duels amid the chaos of battle, and defenses to the last man were all common practice. For the Viking warrior, it was better to die on his feet than to live on his knees. However, it would be a mistake to think of the Vikings as simply bloodthirsty barbarians. Their culture was complex and multifaceted, with a rich tradition of poetry, art, and exploration. The pursuit of an honorable death was just one aspect of a society that valued skill, intelligence, and cunning equally. Poets and storytellers, known as skalds, played a crucial role in perpetuating the ideal of an honorable death. Through their sagas and poems, they immortalized the deeds of great warriors, inspiring future generations to seek similar glory. Posthumous fame, achieved through acts of bravery and recorded in the sagas, was as important as entry into Valhalla itself. It is fascinating to note how the concept of an honorable death manifested itself in different ways depending on the social status of the individual. For a jarl, nobleman, or a king, an honorable death might come in the form of leading a battle, sacrificing oneself to protect one's people. For a farmer or craftsman, it might be defending one's property against invaders or dying during a perilous trading voyage. Even slaves, who held the lowest position in Viking society, could achieve a form of honorable death through voluntary sacrifice at their master's funerals. A particularly intriguing aspect of Viking culture was the figure of the berserk. These warriors, who were said to enter a state of uncontrollable rage during battle, embodied the ideal of honorable death taken to its extreme. They were believed to be immune to pain and fear, fighting with supernatural ferocity. Although the exact nature of the berserk state is debated by modern historians, its presence in the Norse sagas illustrates the Viking fascination with transcending human limits in the face of death. The pursuit of honorable death also significantly influenced Viking architecture and art. Mead halls, the centers of Norse social life, were often decorated with shields, weapons, and tapestries depicting scenes of famous battles and legendary heroes. These depictions served as constant reminders of the warrior ideal and the importance of living and dying with honor. The runestones, monuments erected to the memory of the dead, are another fascinating example of how honorable death was celebrated in Viking culture. Many of these stones contain inscriptions praising the virtues and deeds of the deceased, often mentioning how he or she died in distant battle or on a dangerous trading expedition. These stones were not just memorials, but public declarations of family honor and encouragements for others to follow the example of the deceased. As the Viking Age drew to a close and Christianity became established in Scandinavia, the concept of honorable death underwent a gradual transformation. The new religion brought with it very different ideas about the afterlife, sin, and redemption. Valhalla was replaced by the Christian heaven, and salvation through faith began to supplant salvation through bravery in battle. However, it would be too simplistic to suggest that the old beliefs disappeared entirely. Instead, there was often an interesting fusion between Old Norse ideals and the new Christian faith. For example, the Crusades, which began shortly after the end of the Viking Age, offered a new arena for Norse warriors to demonstrate their bravery, now in the name of Christ rather than Odin. Even in modern times, echoes of the Viking concept of honorable death can be detected in Scandinavian culture and beyond. The emphasis on courage, loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the greater good are values that many societies continue to hold dear, although the context has changed dramatically. When we consider the Viking concept of honorable death, we are confronted with profound questions about how different cultures view mortality and give meaning to life. The Viking approach, with its acceptance and even celebration of death in certain circumstances, offers a stark contrast to the prevailing attitudes in many modern societies where death is often taboo and something to be avoided at all costs. However, it is crucial to avoid over-romanticizing these ancient practices. The reality of Viking life was often brutal and violent, and many of the actions they considered honorable would be seen as barbaric by today's standards. Slavery, violent raids, and bloody vendettas were integral parts of this society, and these aspects should not be ignored or downplayed in our analysis. At the same time, there is something undeniably fascinating and even inspiring about the way the Vikings approached death. Their refusal to bow to the fear of mortality, their determination to live lives full of meaning and adventure, and their belief in the importance of leaving a lasting legacy are ideas that still resonate with us today, even if we manifest them in very different ways. Studying the Viking concept of honorable death offers us a unique window into a culture and time radically different from our own. It challenges us to question our own assumptions about life and death, courage and cowardice, honor and shame. It reminds us that throughout human history, different societies found profoundly different ways of making sense of existence and coping with the inevitability of death. Ultimately, perhaps the most valuable lesson we can take from the Viking concept of honorable death is not about how to die, but about how to live. The emphasis on courage, integrity, and the pursuit of a purpose greater than oneself are ideals that transcend cultures and eras. While we may reject many aspects of Viking morality, there is something universally resonant about their determination to live a life worth remembering. As we bid farewell to this deep dive into Viking culture, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the complexity and diversity of the human experience. The Viking concept of honorable death, with all its brutality and beauty, reminds us that each society must find its own answers to the great questions of existence. And while we may look back on the past with a mixture of fascination and horror, we can also find in it reflections of our own struggles and aspirations. Thus, we end our exploration of the Viking concept of honorable death not with a judgment, but with a reflection. May we take away with us not only a deeper understanding of an ancient culture, but also an invitation to contemplate our own mortality and the legacy we wish to leave behind. For in the end, it is not how we die that defines our honor, but how we choose to live.